Listen to the Word of God. Again, I looked and I saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who have already died are happier than those living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And I saw that all labor and all achievement spring from man's envy of his neighbor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. The fool folds his hands and ruins himself. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and no one is to help him up. Also, if two lie together, they can keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of three strands is not quickly broken. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king, who no longer knows how to take warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty into his kingship. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth and the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before him, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Have you ever asked yourself the question, where is my life going? You ever considered that? Where's my life going? Some people spend a lot of time contemplating that question. Some people never stop to consider that, where they're headed. That is, in their life. Not like on a trip or something like that. Whether you have consciously thought about it or not, each of us spend an enormous amount of time considering the answer to that question for ourselves. In fact, if we could pull a recording out of your head, what do you think we would hear most? Two words. I and me. It would be repeated more than anything. Is something that we either consciously or unconsciously tend to micromanage in our brains. You know, we spend a lot of time thinking about who we are, where we're going, and what's happened to me, and la 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 la, and all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, life is about us. It's about me. It's not about others. I'm more concerned with me than I'm concerned with anything else. And, you know, some people ask the question daily, how am I doing? About. Some would probably say that they don't even consider any of this. Do you really consider your life? Do you stop and you think about where you're going and what's happening in your life? Do you really consider that at all? Either consciously or unconsciously, you do. A lot of us don't want to admit that. But we spend really a lot of time being focused on just the moment. What's happening to me right now? Huh? Is that where your life mostly is focused? In the here and the now, the moment? Huh? Not looking at the big picture? But you see, we are all processing the world through our own eyes. We're not looking at how the world might look at something. What's important to us is how we see it. Right? We respond to the circumstances around us, and we consider how they make us feel. So why am I working so hard? Is it worth it? Am I achieving my goals? Or am I falling short? Or do we even have any goals? Whether in trivial or important ways, the one person I'm always acutely aware of is me. Regardless of what's going on around me, I'm always aware of me. How does that make me feel? Anybody ever, don't raise your hand, but anybody ever been to a psychologist? What's the one question they always ask you? Well, how did that make you feel? You know? That's the important question, right? How do I feel? I mean, it's all about me, right? Isn't that how we tend to live our lives? There's a saying that you may or may not be aware of. Maybe you've never even heard it. And the saying goes like this: you're not what you think you are, but what you think you are. You're not what you think you are, but what you think you are. What do we spend most of our time thinking about? So who or what do we spend a lot of time thinking about? Of course, for me, I spend most of my time thinking about Wendy. You know, I mean, that's the natural, right? I told him in the early service I was just trying to make brownie points. No, it's not the restaurant. That is my wife. Seriously, stop for a moment and consider whom or what you spend most of your time thinking about. Are you thinking about that new car? Or are you thinking about a pair of roller skates? Or what are you thinking about? I mean, come on. There's something that we spend all of our time thinking about, right? Maybe that new tool? I'm sure you girls are thinking about the newest, latest vacuum cleaner, right?
Yeah. iRobot.
Ooh, man.
Yeah.
Let me back up on that one, huh? I feel the little darts coming at me. If we're honest, we spend most of our time thinking about ourselves. In fact, Ecclesiastes says just that. People fill their thoughts or plans with themselves, constantly work out how to navigate the world in a way in which gives meaning and happiness. It's saying that our very source of pain is how we think. We can take things as they come, but it's how we look at them and how we accept them. Things happen to us that we have no control over, and so therefore it's like, oh, it's all against me, right? Or it could just be that thing that day. But we tend to internalize this stuff, and so it becomes our own pain. And it says that, so in effect, to set us free from ourselves, Ecclesiastes gives us a new question to ask. And here's the new question. How are we doing? How are we doing? Not how am I doing? How are we doing? You see a difference? It's not we. I mean, it's we, not me. That's it in a nutshell. So how are we doing? Are we living in such a way that the people beside us, our spouse, our children, siblings, the people who God places in our path, are they the dominant focus in our lives? Are we concerned about them? If they are, the author tells us, then guess what? You're going to find happiness. Happiness comes in trying to help other people. It's doing for other people. It's reaching out. It's not being so inwardly focused. So, how are you doing? Are you inwardly focused, or are you focused on others? You often go to sleep at night thinking about how you might serve somebody else or how you might be kind to somebody tomorrow. If you do, you will find a contentment that nothing else can match. But notice it's not saying that if you live your life for others, you will be more godly. What it's saying is that you'll be more happy. Yeah, you will be more godly, but the big thing here is when you start living your life for other people, you will be much happier. You're going to be happier as you take the focus off of yourself. Nobody here wants to be happy, right? Anybody here want to be happy?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody here turn down happiness if it comes your way? You know, I always remember those guys. Yeah. Well, in fact, Wendy and I were driving past the retro school over here, and I said, look at that. They've got AstroTurf on the playground. When I was a kid, we had dirt, and we liked it like that.
And gravel.
And gravel, yeah. Because when you bail out of that swing, you want to make sure that gravel got in your knee, right?
We got up and just dusted ourselves off and swung some more.
The word he uses here is quietness in verse 6. It simply means rest, peace of mind, calmness of soul. It's a deep well-being for those who know their place in the world, those who are content with the boundary lines of their lives and enjoy the fruit of their labors with a cheerful heart. Do you do that? How many of you do what you do with a cheerful heart? And he says that the way we arrive at this place of rest is to live for we, not me. Now stop for a moment and consider these words. And are they true and worthy of our attention? How often do you go home from work exhausted and miserable because you had to put up with those people? Don't raise your hand, because you know I might be the one you had to put up with. So but how often in our lives is it like that, right? Can't you have to whip your feet to get out of bed because you know you have to go back to that office again this morning, in the morning or whatever? I mean, how bad does it really get? And how often do we come home excited and elated? Yeah, I get to spend time with those people again, right? But how often do we go out and help somebody, we make a difference in somebody's life when we come home, and we are just absolutely tired to the bone, and yet somehow we're happy because we were working for others, not for ourselves. You see the big difference in our lives, and that difference comes from our focus. So often we focus on ourselves, and it's never enough. But somehow when we focus on others, we get more out of our days. Ecclesiastes is trying to convey the idea that life is a gift. It's not gain. Life is a gift. It's not gain. It's not about gain. The world you inhabit and your life are a gift from God, something that, guess what? You didn't deserve. It's a gift. We never deserve a gift. It's somebody's grace who has just given to us because they love us and because they care about us. And life is a gift from God.
Amen.
And we're here for only a short period of time. One day, all of us will return to our eternal home, hopefully. All of you here listening to this today will, I'm sure. Therefore, we are to live our lives before God with reverence and obedience. This is the pathway to joy, even in the midst of misery and pain. So, have a nice meal. Enjoy your favorite beverage if you want to. But be sure that you enjoy whatever the good things come your way. And be sure you give thanks to God for them. Because it's a gift from God.
Amen.
And remember the commandment. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, call your soul and your neighbor as yourself. And there are no greater commandments than these two.
Amen.
The next part of Ecclesiastes, I have to admit, is a little bit negative and depressing. It talks about all the oppression under the sun. It talks about a world full of evil. And I read this, and then I looked at some of the tyrants who have existed in this world and some of the atrocious acts that they have done. And I was amazed. I could not even begin to imagine. And after reading for about 30 minutes, I was so depressed reading about all this atrocity. And of course, most of it happened early on, even before Jesus' day, it's recorded, the things that people did. There was one who built a structure out of bodies, 70,000 bodies seeming together. Can you imagine? The Great Wall of China, as it was being built, the laborers, as they would die or something, were just tossed into the Great Wall as fill. And while we think most of these atrocities really took place early in life, did you know that some of them have taken place since 1990? Can you imagine? I can't even imagine a world where that is even allowed anymore, but yet it still happens. And have you ever wondered in this day and time how that could happen? It happened because people turn their backs on them so that they're not affected personally. If I don't hear about it, I don't have to worry about it. If I don't look at it, I don't have to worry about it. It doesn't affect me. It's somebody else in some other part of the world, so it doesn't affect me, and I don't have to worry about it. You see, that's how these things happen. And it's because of such things that Jesus Christ came into this world. He took the punishment that's truly ours, and it's covered with his own blood what we have done, all the wrongs we've done. And I was reading, I wondered, has his sacrifice really made any difference in this world as far as these atrocities and everything? And I can tell you that since Jesus Christ has come into this world, they have become fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer and far in between. Probably the worst of them had a recent history, of course, would be Hitler. But still, they become fewer and fewer. And they become fewer and fewer because people heard the word that Jesus brought into this world. They heard what it means to truly love one another. And things have begun to change. People have begun to stand up for each other. And so therefore, Christ has made a huge difference in this world and how we treat each other. And as I read these dates and these stories all about these atrocities, what came to mind was since Christ has come, things have gotten better. It's true that Jesus is the one whose life, death, and resurrection have begun to remake the world. We see in Mark 7:37, the people respond to Christ's healing of the deaf and dumb man by saying, He has done all things well, which echoes back to what God said in the beginning when He created everything. And God looked at it and He said, it is good. Recently I was reading some excerpts from the book Architects of Ruin. And I was shocked to read what actually caused the housing bubble to burst. I guess people are making a lot of money. They don't stop to think about how it affects other people. When we pursue gain because we think that's all that there is, and that's all there is to be had, guess what? People get hurt. It happens. And as believers, we can never afford to fold our arms and say, well, gosh, that's just the way it is. Tough. We have a responsibility to do what we can to keep things like that from happening. You see, that's as far from genuine Christian faith as it can possibly get. And Ecclesiastes says, I saw that all toil and all skill and all work come from man's envy of his neighbor. Envy has long been considered one of the 7 deadly sins. You see the picture on the bulletin, picture up here on the screen, and the people watching this on video won't be able to see it, but what do you think the one fish on the left is thinking? I wish I was in the bowl on the right. Huh? Got the lounge chair, got some gravel in the bottom, got a little hat hanging there. I mean, isn't that the truth? Isn't that what life seems to be, we envy what our neighbors have. We envy everybody else. We're not content with what we are. We're not content with who we are and who we're with. We always have this envy that seems to be creeping into our lives. Ecclesiastes is probing deep inside the human heart. All of this driving and toiling, working and working and working, is all motivated by me. Me. This is what I want. This is what's important because this is what I want. Me, I, not we. Well, what about the others? What do they need? We need to ask ourselves, how can I be a giver instead of a getter? A servant of the Lord instead of myself. When we think about serving and loving our neighbors, it prevents two extremes: idle laziness and manic busyness. Verses 5 and 6. Laziness is a way of hating your neighbor. You have nothing to give them. Ecclesiastes says, the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. That's a deliberate extreme statement used to illustrate the corrosive nature and effects of this inverted excess. Instead of embracing life and giving himself to others, the sluggard gives himself to himself. And in the end, that's all that's left is himself. And if he's going to eat himself, how long do you think that's going to last? Not very long. It won't be long until he doesn't have anything to even give himself. But it's also said of workaholics. You ever ask a workaholic who's on his deathbed, don't you wish you could spend more days at the office? You think they couldn't wait to go back to the office if they were to recover? No, that very few people who are on their deathbed regret they didn't spend more days in the office instead with people that they love. Living for we, not me, means a healthier, happier me. It's easy to make a target out of the rich, but the Bible is not against wealth. Money is not the root of all evil. It's the love of money. 1 Timothy 6:10. Ecclesiastes is exactly the same thing in picture form. It's two-handed toiling for wealth, and in it itself is the root of evil. You see, when you're using both your hands to toil for yourself, you don't have a hand that you can help anybody else with, because I'm all concerned with getting all I can get a hold of, instead of being able to help one another. Matt Chandler gives an illustration. He says he's never had a girl come in his office with tears and tell him that she hates her dad because he used to drop her off at school and don't beat up for her. It was so embarrassing, and she has never been able to forgive him. He said that has never happened to him. He says he's never had a girl who has come in and hates her dad because he didn't buy her a pony or didn't send her on the school ski trip. He said, but he's had lots and lots of women come in whose fathers made $60,000 a year, who could afford to send the entire school on a ski trip, who hate their father because they never paid them any attention. Never paid them any attention. These women have not known the love of their father, and so they have given a thoroughly warped perception of life. Can you imagine going through life and not really knowing what love is like? It's just really hard to understand. Ecclesiastes tells us that the value of life is not in what you earn, but it is in what you relate to. It's not about what you buy. It's about what you give. It's there. It's in black and white. It's about relationships and how 2 and 3 are better than 1. If you want to make money, do it with somebody else, and then you have somebody to share it with. And perhaps 4 is better than 3, and so on and so forth. We, not me, is always going to be better than me alone. This is how God designed us to flourish. So I have one last question to ask you this morning. How are you doing with asking? How are you doing?